There's a lot going on with North Idaho College lately. In fact, it's been that way for the past 2 years, and it hasn't exactly been a good thing for the school. The latest coming over the weekend when the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities issued another warning to the community college in Coeur d'Alene, saying your accreditation is on the line. And they listed more than a handful of standards of accreditation in which North Idaho College seems to not be in compliance. The school has until January 4th to respond, by the way. And notice I said another warning of accreditation compliance. Like I said, North Idaho College has been going through some things lately. So much so that there have been several stories written about what is going on with the 10,000 student school, some of them more than 2,000 words long. Now, we can't do that here on television, but let's get to the 208 abridged version of how North Idaho College got here. There was an election in November of 2020 in which the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee, they showed a lot of interest in that election. And in that election, Todd Banducci, the longest serving member of the board to that point, ran unopposed and won. So did Greg McKenzie, and so did Michael Barnes. And the 5-member board looked like this: Banducci, McKenzie, Barnes, Christy Wood, and Ken Howard. Barnes would eventually resign in January of 2022. Apparently, there was some question as to whether he actually lived in North Idaho or South Dakota, so he'd be out soon. Meanwhile, in March of 2021, several human rights groups sent a letter of complaint to the Northwest Colleges of Accreditation, the region's accrediting body, highlighting a series of escalated acts by Banducci and the board, claiming they violated students' and staff civil rights. Jump to September of 2021. The fired president, Rick McLennan, the board fired President Rick McLennan without cause or explanation. He'd been president since 2016. The board then hired the school's wrestling coach as interim president a month later, pointing to his doctorate in educational leadership as, well, he's a good fit. A month after that, a second complaint filed with NWCCU, citing those two things and for the board refusing to adopt an infectious disease policy in the middle of a pandemic. Jump ahead to February this year. A panel with the NWCCU recommends Idaho's State Board of Education start overseeing what's happening at NIC and their board, and suggests the college be placed on probation for accreditation. But instead, well, that panel actually just issues an accreditation warning to the school. That same week, longtime trustees Christy Wood and Ken Howard announced resignations effective May 3rd. So now, because of Barnes' resignation, there was no longer enough members on the board to make decisions, which would be a quorum. And according to state law, that would mean the State Board of Ed would appoint replacements. However, Banducci and McKenzie, well, they filed a lawsuit to stop that from happening, saying the State Board of Ed can only appoint one trustee to complete the quorum. But they pulled their lawsuit a week later. So the State Board of Ed did that. They appointed members to the board. And on May 6th, they named David Wold, John Getty, Pete Brochette as successors. The NIC board is now Chair Banducci, McKenzie, Wold, Getty, and Brochette. The next month, that board hires the next president, Nick Swain, hired him from Virginia. Banducci and McKenzie, well, they voted against that hiring. Then comes the election last month. Terry Zimmerman, Brad Corkle, and Mike Wagoner are elected to replace those appointed trustees. The NIC Board of Trustees now looks like this. That'd be Todd Banducci, Greg McKenzie, Terry Zimmerman, Brad Corkle, and Mike Wagoner. A few weeks later, Mark Lyons resigned as attorney for NIC after 23 years in doing so, saying, "It had become clear that my services are no longer desired by those who will soon hold a majority position with the Board of Trustees." Then in their first meeting together, that Board of Trustees on December 5th, Todd Banducci voted for himself as the new chair, went on about a 7-minute rant about how he had been treated the past year, then rescinded his vote as chair and voted to put Greg McKenzie in that position. The board also accepted the resignation of that attorney Lyons and named Art McComber the new attorney. Art McComber, the man who lost the Republican primary for attorney general, that same one. You know who opposed that hiring? President Nick Swain, because he said that hiring and the discussion of it seemed to violate Idaho's public meetings laws. President Swain was then placed on leave by the board 4 days later. Then a week after that, Mr. Swain filed a lawsuit to be reinstated. Like I said, it is a lot. So we wanted to know more about how we got here from an investigative reporter working in North Idaho who's been exploring that kind of stuff. Daniel Walters has looked into North Idaho College and extremism in Idaho extensively. And he told us today, you can trace this tumultuous 2 years for NIC to that November 2020 election.
We got to remember this is 2020, where there's all of this already like conflict. Everyone's suddenly focusing on education in terms of, are we going to be wearing masks? Are we going to do online classes? This is a really big deal, especially in North Idaho, where there's just a ton of conservatives. It's a really big deal too. And so it wasn't necessarily surprised that there was a push by the local Republican Party there to try to elect people to those positions.
This all kind of spawned because the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee said, we need to be on school boards.
Yes. Yeah. So like this has been a thing for a while. So this has been a little bit of a thing for a while. But when I talked to Bjorn Handeen, who was one of the longtime member of the Kootenai County Republicans, and he basically tells me that, hey, we are feeling like the real power is not necessarily even in these legislators. It's not in these big high profile positions. It's in it's in the Board of Health, it's in the sewer board, it's in the water board, it's in the school boards. And so this is like an actual effort to try to like put their people, some of whom, and Bjorn admitted this, weren't very experienced at all. So they have a lot of experience. This is one of their challenges. Suddenly they're getting, put in charge of some of these environments, and they don't necessarily have the experience built up. But they feel like they're basically fighting the deep state. They're fighting the bureaucrats. They're fighting the cocktail swirling academic class that is sort of holding back the conservative movement.
It doesn't seem to be working out very well for them the last couple of years. When it comes to the North Idaho College, it has not been running smoothly. No,
it's not been smooth at all. But if you talk to them, they will say it's not our fault that things are going smoothly. It's these. It's the Save NIC, it's the Friends of NIC, it's these people that say they love the college that are trying to they're actually causing the problems. They're arguing that the accreditation crisis has been overblown, that these people are exaggerating it for political gain. And so they kind of feel like it's those kind of maneuvers that have created the problem and not their sort of agenda.
Is there a possibility that North Idaho College is going to go away? They're going to lose their accreditation and they're not going to be the school they've been for decades?
I say yes with a caveat. And the caveat is that basically like they're in a warning stage right now, and they still haven't reached the probation stage. But it looks like from the most recent, they gave them like 2 weeks to try to like respond to some of their concerns. It does seem like the accreditation body is extremely concerned about what's happening.
What's your overall view of what's happening and what's going to happen?
We have a long time power struggle between the establishment moderate portions of the Idaho GOP and the more right-wing hardcore section of the Idaho GOP. The hardcore section is just dominating in terms of grassroots, in terms of elections, in terms of they have their own media infrastructure, their own media ecosystem. And what's happened is the college is basically the rope in the middle of that tug of war. And at this point, every kind of pole, every side, the rope is getting more and more frayed. And the danger is that eventually that rope might break. And to some degree, if like one of the sides just said, okay, I don't care anymore, we're just going to let you control it, it might be better for the college ultimately, because you might not be in that same risk of accreditation. But to some degree, it's the back and forth that's really doing a lot of damage.
That explanation of the tug of war and the fraying rope Daniel made kind of sounds like a microcosm of the whole Republican Party right now in Idaho. Again, this is just a warning to North Idaho College from that accreditation commission. They've been here before, and they're still a few steps away from actually losing accreditation. They have 2 weeks to respond to the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. So if North Idaho College does lose its accreditation, well, the school and its students will lose access to federal financial aid, and any credits earned will likely have a hard time transferring to another school. By the way, we have tried to reach out to trustee Todd Banducci and former trustees, but have yet to receive a response. We also reached out to the school president, Nick Swain, who was placed on leave 10 days ago. He said he'd prefer not to participate in an interview at this time. Well, Saturday night, the Idaho Steelheads beat the Rapid City Rush 5-1 to extend their win streak to 6 games, and they now hold the best record in the East Coast Hockey League. A lot for the sold-out crowd to get behind. But what happened before the puck dropped also stirred some emotions for the home team. Number 71, Lance Galbraith, passed away after a car crash in Canada last spring. Making this weekend's game a little bittersweet because Rapid City Rush head coach Scott Burt played with Galbraith as a Steelhead from 2003 to 2007. And Coach Burt shared his love for his teammate during Saturday's raising of the sweater ceremony.
Lance was taken away from us way too soon, but his legacy will continue on. That's a fact. Lance, I love you. I love you as a brother. I and our teammates will continue to make you proud because we know you're watching down on us. Until we meet again, brother, this honor is well deserved. For the boys. Thank you.
For the boys. Joe Paris did a story on this last Friday. You can see it at ktvb.com. Galbraith's sweater is going to hang on the wall of the Idaho Central Arena alongside other Steelies greats like Cal Ingram, Marty Flickel, and Scotty Burt himself. The Steelheads will take the ice again Wednesday to play the Utah Grizzlies. All right, this week we're taking a look back on some of our favorite stories of the year. 80 years ago, in August, the Minidoka incarceration camp opened. A lot of it was unfinished when the thousands of Japanese Americans arrived. With most of them coming from the lush coastal areas around the Northwest, you can imagine the shock of showing up to a dry, dusty destination known as Jerome County, Idaho. 80 years later, most of the 13,000 Japanese Americans who spent time there are no longer with us, but their stories are being kept alive through the Minidoka Pilgrimage Committee, a group who tries to make regular trips to what is now known as the National Historic Site in Hunt, operated by the National Park Service. They made another trip this summer, and we were fortunate enough to tag along to try to grasp the full magnitude. It's the first sight you see at the west entrance, much like those who arrived 80 years ago, to what was then called the Minidoka Relocation Center. The guard tower, one of 8 that once watched over the property. Then the Lava Rock Guardhouse.
Kind of bar that would have been here, right? And a gate.
Which controlled who came in.
And a check-in point.
And who came out. And keeping them in, the barbed wire. Wrapping the perimeter, a fence which wouldn't be in place until months after people moved in. You can see why Relocation Center would be renamed and better known as Incarceration Camp.
So if you want to come a little bit closer, I want to re-welcome everybody here to Minidoka National Historic Site.
Kurt Ikeda is the Director of Interpretation and Education at Minidoka.
120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were incarcerated during World War II.
Kurt's job is to explain how Japanese Americans,
over 13,000 who were incarcerated here at Minidoka during the 3 years of operation,
forced to live here.
The majority being from the Pacific Northwest, Seattleites, Portlanders, 135 folks from Alaska.
Transformed 33,000 dusty, desolate, high desert acres into fertile farmland. with more than 640 buildings.
Packed, 40 feet in between these barracks, 40 feet, 40 feet, 40 feet.
A self-sustained city, sort of.
The water systems were not ready until October here, 2 months after construction.
That in 1943 would have been Idaho's 7th largest. Today,
we have Block 19 right over here on this map showing you kind of how far Minidoka was.
The National Historic Site is reduced to just 73 acres, with only 6 original buildings.
To my right-hand side, the root cellar, which we'll walk to.
Along with divulging dramatic numbers,
A 20 by 120 size barrack would have been where our families were incarcerated.
Kurt likes to ask how many of his visitors are here for the first time.
You said Block 42. Can I ask you why that specific block?
Oh, that's where my family was.
This group, though, they've been here before.
This would be Barrack 1 right here. That was my home.
Yep, yeah, Barrack 1 right over here. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Eugene Tagawa arrived in 1942 with his parents and 2 older sisters.
I was born in June of that year, so I was, like 3 months old when I came here. My younger brother was born here.
Eugene was too young to remember much about his time at camp,
And we'll go into enter the barracks.
but that's why he keeps coming back.
Oh, absolutely. Every time is a new experience because the people are different.
Since 2009, Eugene has been part of the Minidoka Pilgrimage Committee,
Dozo.
a group formed nearly 20 years ago to bring together family and friends of former incarcerees back to these barracks.
I encourage you to find a place on the wall that feels appropriate to kind of lay your hand on and
Pre-pandemic, these pilgrimages would boast more than 300 plus people
to feel history.
to not only see the conditions they faced,
There was a single light bulb, a potbelly stove, army cots with wool blankets, and as you all know the phrase, only what we could carry.
but to honor that generation
Is there a certain just kind of phrase, a feeling that you get standing aside here today?
who had their rights and livelihoods more than just relocated.
Family, connection, healing.
I could feel that. I could feel that in your voice. I could feel that in this space.
Eugene has been back about a dozen times, and it's all still as fresh as the first.
The first time I came on the pilgrimage, I met this man that I'd known when I was in junior high school as a church leader. And he looked at my name tag and he said, "Oh, I know this name." And I said, "Yeah, Howard, I went to a Faith Bible Church when I was in junior high school." He said, "No, I know your father." He said, "I played baseball with your father in camp." And then he told me some stories about my father that I never knew. I didn't know my father played baseball in camp. So that was my first pilgrimage. And I said, whoa, what a gift, right? Yeah. So I kept coming back.
And why Eugene is so encouraged to see the younger generations alongside.
Well, the barracks are just the most intimate spaces, right, that were in these concentration camps.
Aaron Shigaki's family spent nearly 3.5 years at Minidoka.
I guess I can just feel the energy, and I just think about my family and the things that they endured.
Her grandfather's bitterness led them to being one of the last to leave.
She was just so angry the whole time, and he was one of those guys who was like, we leave when they kick us out.
It's that strength of character Aaron wanted to commemorate when she joined the Pilgrimage Committee almost 10 years ago.
I also realized that I didn't know a thing. There was like a paragraph in my 8th grade Washington State history book.
When we think about Minidoka, we think about dust, we think about lack of privacy.
Oh, there's certainly a lot to learn about Minidoka.
Lines for everything.
But maybe there's a lot more to learn from Minidoka.
45 cents per person per day in 1942 was the amount of money spent per person.
I want them to learn the whole story about how a whole community and people were unconstitutionally, unjustly incarcerated because of their race. And I want people to understand that to a certain degree, it's still happening now. I don't think as a country we've fully grappled with it. I know as a community we're not done grappling with it. When these truths can really become part of the American narrative, we're going to be better for it. I really believe that. But we have to tell it all,
Telling it all includes what they endeavored for distraction. There was music and dancing, stage shows and swimming holes, And they played sports like golf and basketball, and of course,
it was
baseball.
One of the only pastimes out here, one of the only distractions from their reality, which was just being out here in this desolate place with nothing around them. And they were just able to forget their situation just for a little bit.
Johnny and Narita only knew about Minidoka through family chatter.
Growing up, you always hear about camp. I guess at some point my family kind of gave me the rundown of what it was, what happened, the gravity of it all. And it never really sunk in until I came out here.
In 2016, Johnny joined his grandpa, George Nakagawa, a former player for the Hunt team, for the dedication of the baseball field.
This place has a certain power to it. It's like a place of great trauma and pain, and it's also a place of healing.
Part of that healing happened right here on this field.
And so they honored my grandpa and the other baseball players, and we played catch for a bit. And I think I ran around the bases. Yeah, I'm never gonna forget that. Yeah.
George left his ball and glove to the Minidoka Museum. But when he died a year later, he left something more for his grandson.
It's our legacy, for better or for worse. It's a part of American history and our history that we can't erase, and we shouldn't try to erase it.
For the 13,000 people of Jackson,
Which is what the Minidoka Pilgrimage Committee is really all about.
and this ball field was built as a community effort. Minidoka will always be a community-centered historic site.
Most of the buildings may be gone or coming apart, but to keep them from fading from history or from memory will be about keeping connected
Oh, the raw egg. Oh yeah, tamago kake.
those
Yeah.
who are already connected.
We are here together now, and we get to reclaim this story. We get to reclaim this place and remember it for what it is, which is a terrible place.
To keep the Minidoka story in clear focus.
It's about remembering this, not forgetting, and just saying never again.
Our final moments of the show, Bill commenting on our story out of North Idaho with North Idaho College, the Idaho Republican Party. The gene pool is in need of chlorine. As a moderate Republican, I don't recognize the party and its membership on the far right. We're told it's a wide tent for everybody in the Republican Party, so maybe wide enough for you too, Bill. Notice the coffee cup laptop stand. New fad or budget cuts, asked Gary. Well, actually, that's been around for a while. Well, we've been doing that since the beginning of the pandemic and Zoom because nobody likes that camera pointed up anybody's nose, right? So kind of lift it up a little bit. Coffee cups happen to be around. We went with coffee cups. We'll see you tomorrow.